I want to talk to you about how to problem solve word problems in statistics. Um, this is an area that I'm pretty good at, that I do fairly well at. And I've often wondered, why do some people get really concerned and absolutely confused by word problems. And I think it's something I do relatively well. And I've always sort of wondered, why is it that's true? Um, some people might say, well, you're just really smart, Steve. And I'm going, I, I may be, but I don't think that's the issue. And besides, saying it's like because I'm smart, it's like, well, it's magic. It's like nothing you can do about it. And what I think it actually is, you can learn how to do this. There's a process to it. And that's what I want to spend a little bit of time on today, is I'd like to talk through how to do this, or how I do it at least, or how I think about it. Because I tend to go at it in a fairly systematic way. That's not always. Sometimes I look at a statistics problem or a word problem, I can go, oh, well, that sucked. Then you just do it. And if that works for you, and you're doing word problems, and it's like, bing, I got it. It's like, well, don't pay any attention to what I'm talking about here. What I want to talk about here is the places where you're doing something and you get to a point and you kind of go, I don't have a clue what to do next. I don't know what he's looking for here. I'm lost. Then I want to suggest a process to you at the point where you feel lost. If you're feeling fine and it's working, keep doing what you're doing. Don't pay attention to this. If you get lost, or if you're really confused about what is it he's looking for here, what am I supposed to be, then I'd say, look at this process. And I want to mention here particularly, I'm going to share, or I'm going to present online, or put this in the course, a thing on problem solving statistics. And it's about sort of how I think about this stuff and what I suggest to you. And I want to come back to my definition of statistics is that it's the science of conducting studies to collect, organize, summarize, analyze, present, and draw conclusions from data in order to assist us in problem solving and decision making. That's the final two things are the key things for me. This is not a theoretical statistics course. This is an applied statistics course. How do you use it to solve problems and make decisions? And a big part of this that I want to mention is I talk about the word conducting studies. All that means for me is that I go about it in a systematic way. And what I want to suggest to here is a systematic way about trying to solve problems. I identify in the handout that, again, this will be posted online. There are 6 questions. And again, I don't want to suggest that answering the 6 questions will make everything sweet and great for you and you'll live happily ever after in your life. I don't want to suggest that at all to you. I'm just suggesting it's a more systematic way of going about it that I think is sometimes really useful. And here's the other crucial thing from my course particularly. Almost everything we do in this course, aside from the quizzes, if you submit something, you can get some credit for it. If you submit nothing, you get a 0. Now you got to decide whether you would rather average in a 5 or a 2 or a 5 or a 0 into your overall score, your overall grade score for the semester. I'd suggest to you that a 2 is better than a 0. Now, if you get the whole 5 points, great. But you walk through these 6 questions and it'll help you do some pieces of it. And you submit that to me and you'll qualify for some partial credit. That's what I'm asking for here. Let me go through what I'm talking about here. For the first thing I do when I have a word problem or something like that is I say, what do I know? And often what I'll do, again, particularly when I'm getting lost on something, I will sit down and write it. I'll take a piece of blank paper, I'll take a blank sheet of paper and a pen or pencil, and I'll just sort of write some notes about what do I know about this thing? And that includes things like, you say, well, I don't know anything. Well, you're given things in the problems typically. You're given things like with a data set, Q. Well, you know the data set. If I ask you to find the probability of something or other, you could look at what kind of thing we're looking at here and say, well, I can know something about it from the kind of things he's telling us about it. You sit down and write out just the little tiny pieces of data that you know that you already have in the situation. And you put that in one place and say, this is what I know. And when I start out the problem, this is what I know. This is the data that he's given me, or the information that I've given up front in it. The second piece of it is figuring out what's being asked for. What do you have to figure out? Typically, in most problems, it'll tell you specifically what you have to find out. Now, here's a big clue in this process is, if we're in the chapter on discrete probability distributions, what I'm probably going to be asking you about is something that has to do with discrete probability distributions. And I'm not going to be asking you about estimation or something that we haven't covered. It's probably what I'm asking you in problem series, almost certainly within the chapter that we're talking from. As you're going through and you're reading stuff, as you read a problem, you say, I don't know what this word means. When he says discrete probability distributions, or he asks for a time series analysis, I don't know what that means. And generally what I'd say is go back to the written work, because almost every place there, I don't ask you for anything that I have not defined someplace earlier. And sit down and write them out again. So you're clear about it, what you're looking for. Are there symbols that are being used you don't understand? Again, go back and look at the chapter. They're almost always, if I'm using symbols, I've showed them to you in the chapter. So you go back and pull the pieces out. So by the time you've done some of the stuff, you're pretty clear about what it is you need to know, and what you know already and what you need to know. And those are two crucial steps in the process. By the way, the other thing to think of here is, this is going to go, you'll get into this more as we get later in the class, and I'm going to come back to this systematically later in the class and sort of ask you about some things in it. But I'm going to give you the great general framework here. Does the problem ask you for a number? Does it ask you for a judgment? Does it ask you for a decision? Does it ask you to present something? I've had students who have solved problems and shown me all their work on solving the problem and never answered the question that I asked in the problem. And they didn't get full credit. I would say, is option A or option B better? And they'd show me all the math for how they did option A and option B, and never give me the answer. And I'm going, I'm sorry, you're going to lose points in that process because you didn't answer what was asked for. And that's a piece to think about here as you're going through it. What am I asking for? And I'll tell you, real life, that gets tougher, because very often you'll get somebody who says, well, you do this for me and get me, you know, what's important out of this. And you're kind of going, so you're leaving it to me to figure out what I should be looking for in the process. That's a real managerial issue, but that's a managerial issue rather than a statistics issue. Third thing is, what tools might help you? And again, particularly as we get further on, if I'm giving you problems, the tools are in that chapter, and that you stop and look at it, and it's like, typically, I think in one chapter, I show you 6 different Excel tools. But I also give you a chart that says, if you're looking for this, then you want this. And if you're looking for this, then you want this. But if you're looking for this, you're looking, and I tell you, it's like, so if you've done question part number 2 about what's it asking for, you can look at the chart and say, oh, okay. Particularly, you want to think about when if I've asked you for something, it's like, tell me the probability of such and such. And you start looking at the chart and it says, this thing here gives a percentage. It's like, well, but this one here says it gives me a probability. I'm going, well, that's probably a better choice, because the language of the question matches the language of the tool. Here's a tough one, number 4. How do I try to put the right numbers in the right place in the Excel tool? Oh, that's hard. And just a couple things to note here is, the problem almost everybody has had, now I won't say everybody, the most common problem that I have seen when people have used the data analysis tools is they go through and do something, And what they do is they'll do it. There's 25 pieces of data in a data set, and they'll work on 23 pieces of the data or 24 pieces of the data. They'll do it correctly, but they don't put all the data pieces in. And if you look in the and the answer comes up, it tells you what the sample size you worked with. And if the original sample size had 25 and your report says you have 24, you missed something and you're going to have a wrong answer just for that very reason. Most Excel tools have little dialog boxes, that little question marks on it. If you click on it, it gives you a little bit of explanation about what they're looking for. That's a really useful thing. Number 5, this is an interesting piece. You do something wrong. And you get an answer. For instance, I ask you a probability and your answer comes out 106. Well, if you stop and think about it, you can't have a probability of 106. Or you look at some numbers and the numbers range from 3.25 to 3.75 and you get a mean and you have a mean of 14. You're going to go on, wait a minute, you can't have a mean of 14 when the range is 3.25 to 3.75. The mean's got to be in the middle of that somewhere, because that's what a mean refers to, as the center of a piece of data. It's often really useful when you get an answer to stop and think about is, does this seem reasonable? Does this make sense to me? Does this answer make sense against what we're looking for? That's part of it. Again, there is a computation piece to statistics, but a lot of statistics is trying to answer questions, solve problems, and make decisions. And to some extent, when you get an outcome, you have to stop and say, does this outcome make sense for what the problem is? This is a place where, again, I have students make mistakes and I'm sort of astounded going, if you think about getting a probability of 106, it's like, that doesn't make sense. You haven't thought about what your answer is. You've done some mathematics incorrectly, as it turns out. But if you stop and think about is it a reasonable sort of answer to something, then you realize, oh, I must have done something wrong. And by the way, we all do things wrong. What you don't tend to see here is a lot of the places I do problems or I walk through stuff, and what you see is my 4th or 5th attempt at something, because I've gone through and done something and I get the answer going, well, that doesn't make any sense. Let me go back and do that over again. And I will do things often several times before I get something that says, okay, that answer makes sense given this problem. And you're trying to solve a problem, not just do the computation. If this were a simple math class, it'd be to do the computation. This is not. One of the last pieces, and I'm going to go back up here. It's like about a piece of statistics is drawing conclusions from data. That's an important part of this. And I'm going to ask you at times to draw conclusions, to interpret the data. It's going to feel clumsy. It's going to feel frustrating. You're going to trip over your words the first time when you first start it. The way you get better at it is trying it. And if you trip over your words, I will try and correct you and help you think about this. I'm not doing that to make you feel stupid or make you feel bad. We always feel clumsy when we're doing new things. Trying it out, and I will help you shape your words better as you go on. That's part of what I want you to be able to do, is to communicate your results to people. That will empower you more, and it'll be helpful to you in the longer run. So that's a problem. There's 6 steps in that process, and I'm asking you to think about doing those 6 steps. When you get stuck, again, if you're doing fine and you're cranking and things are going, ignore me. Do it the way you're doing. But if you get caught, I'd go back to those 6 steps, because I would tell you, That's how I tend to solve problems in statistics when I don't know what I'm doing. Or I get something and going, oh my God, what are they asking for? I tend to go, this is what I go back to, the 6 steps I just laid out here for you. And I tend to walk through those things much more systematically. And I would suggest to you, it's a tool that can be helpful. It's a process that can be helpful to you in doing word problems as we go along. Good luck with that.